Welcome to the Kindle Chronicles, the Friday podcast all about your Kindle. I'm Len Edgerly. Today is April 20th, 2018. Greetings from Denver, Colorado, where this week I Skyped to New York City for a conversation with Hannah Howard, whose debut memoir, Feast, True Love in and Out of the Kitchen, was published on April 1st by Amazon's Little A imprint.
It's not that I sought out to be published by Amazon. It was that Amazon happened to be the people who believed in me and my book. And they've been so wonderful to work with.
Also this week, Jeff Bezos released his annual letter to shareowners, parts of which rang with the clarity of angels singing, to use a writerly phrase from Jeff's epistle. I'll also share excerpts from a podcast interview with Amazon's seldom quoted or publicly seen Senior Vice President of Corporate Affairs, Jay Carney. For the tech tip, I'm going to introduce you to a new way to customize Alexa for fun and maybe some usefulness. Alexa, will I get the show done early tonight?
Not if you keep asking me stupid questions.
First up in news, Amazon's founder and CEO 2 days ago released his 20th annual letter to share owners, as he calls us. That's kind of an interesting tweak of the more commonly used term shareholders. As usual, the letter rewards a close, slow reading, but the journalists tasked with mining it for breaking news all focused on the same story. Here's an example from CNBC.
Amazon, where the curtain has finally been lifted on one of the company's most closely guarded secrets. How many people actually subscribe to Amazon Prime? And CNBC's Dee Boza has more on the numbers for us. Dee.
Hey, well, that's right. 13 years post-Prime launch, Bezos finally giving us a number. That is 100 million Prime subscribers globally. They pay not just the annual $99 fee, but they're also being pulled deeper into Amazon's ecosystem. Now, to put it into perspective, the number of Prime members is lower than that of Netflix subscribers, but far higher than the subscribers of other popular services like Spotify and Hulu.
That number of more than 100 million for Prime members exceeded most of the recent estimates of Prime membership that I've seen. Bezos also stated that in 2017, Amazon shipped more than 5 billion items with Prime worldwide, and more new members joined Prime last year than in any previous year, both worldwide and here in the U.S. Before getting to the business highlights, Amazon CEO penned what amounts to a tutorial or maybe a business school case study on how an organization like Amazon can maintain high standards at all levels of detail and in all parts of the business in order to keep pace with what he called the, quote, divine discontent of customers whose expectations are never static, they always go up. He continued, "It's human nature. We didn't ascend from our hunter-gatherer days by being satisfied. People have a voracious appetite for a better way, and yesterday's wow quickly becomes today's ordinary. I see that cycle of improvement happening at a faster rate than ever before." The word learn appears 18 times in this 6,000-word letter, and as Bezos warms to his task of sharing what Amazonians have learned about high standards, the language begins by sounding pretty academic, but certainly more academic than investor relations-y. Quote, "First, there's a foundational question," Professor Bezos wrote. "Are high standards intrinsic or teachable?" He comes down on teachable, and I recommend the lively discussion that follows. Don't worry, it's not all written in academic tropes. He draws on examples of basketball. Quote, "You can teach me many things, but you can't teach me to be tall," handstands, and Amazon's famous practice of starting meetings with the silent reading of 6-page memos. My favorite line in the letter is a description of the occasionally great memos that result from teamwork and long hours of preparation. "Some have the clarity of angels singing," Bezos writes. Quote, "They are brilliant and thoughtful and set up the meeting for high-quality discussion." This description of memo writing makes me wish we knew more about how Jeff Bezos writes these annual essays, which really get quite a following, lots of coverage in the media and business leaders reading them carefully to see what they can learn. How early in the year does he start them, I wonder? Who does he share the early drafts with? His wife, Mackenzie, is a published novelist herself, so it's easy to imagine she has a chance to weigh in, perhaps offering some of the more original and writerly words like squishier, divinely discontent, and that one I've mentioned, the clarity of angels singing. We've seen Bezos before talk about the benefits of organizing around the ever-increasing standards of customers, but this is the first time I've seen him drill down into the how of pursuing high standards in an organization. I knew it was worth following his argument when I realized the connection to my own efforts to pick up guitar playing in recent years after a long hiatus. I have had the first requirement handled. I recognize what good guitar playing looks like. My cousin Jim plays excellent guitar in a bluegrass band, and I can see the confidence of his movement up and down the neck of the instrument and the intricacy of his picking. What I have failed sometimes at is what Bezos calls scope, and that means realistic expectations for how hard it should be and how much work it will take to achieve that high standard. I've thought if I played maybe 20 minutes, half an hour, a few times a week, that I could reach a higher level. Not likely. The times when I've studied under a teacher who has pushed me to practice an hour a day in order to not sound like a total hacker at the next lesson, those were the times that I made progress. A close friend of Bezos decided to learn to do a perfect freestanding handstand and ended up with an actual handstand coach who told her that most people think they can master the move in 2 weeks. The reality is it takes about 6 months of daily practice. I think you can see this principle of high standards and how to achieve them evident in the sometimes surprisingly long development cycles for Amazon's new products. For example, Amazon started work on the Alexa and Echo project in 2010, 5 years before the Echo was introduced in the U.S. on June 23, 2015. The team was practicing its handstands for a lot longer than 2 weeks. Once the CEO turned from intriguing leadership insights to business performance in the past year, his letter offered up many tidbits of progress beyond that newsworthy figure of the 100 million Prime members. For example, far-field speech recognition in Echo devices has increased 15% in the past year, he said. This confirms a sense I've had that it's become more challenging to talk to the Echo show on my desk without getting the attention of the Echo in our dining room here in the Denver apartment. I have to bend toward the show and speak just above a whisper for the far-field technology 2 rooms away not to eavesdrop. If I had both of these devices on the same Amazon account, it wouldn't be a problem because one device would answer instead of the 2 of them speaking in rough unison. But I have the show here connected to my parents' Amazon account. That's the way I finally figured out that I can drop in on them in specific rooms of their home in Cambridge. Another milestone of Alexa improvement is that her spoken language understanding has improved by more than 25% over the past 12 months, Bezos said. Again, I think I've noticed improvement in a general way. She just seems to get better and better at understanding what I'm saying. Another nugget of accomplishment in the letter stated that more than 1,000 independent authors earned more than $100,000 each in royalties during 2017 through Kindle Direct Publishing. That's pretty impressive. Amazon now has 560,000 employees, 2 million sellers on its website, millions of Amazon Web Services developers, and hundreds of millions of customers around the world. As in the Bezos letter 20 years ago, he still maintains it's day one. The next story I want to share with you came my way via the Axe Files. That's a podcast by a former Obama political strategist, David Axelrod. Axe is blessed with a mellow voice and a sly, seasoned take on politics, and he's trying to evolve from his purely partisan days as he works to build a broader constituency for the University of Chicago's Institute of Politics that he heads. When I saw on my iTunes podcast feed that Jay Carney had recorded an interview with Axelrod, I couldn't wait to hear if the conversation would provide any insights into what role Carney plays as Amazon's top public affairs executive. He was hired in 2015, and that was pretty much the last time he took a public stand on Amazon's behalf. That was the summer, you may remember, when the New York Times published a big story portraying Amazon as a hard-hearted place to work with employees frequently weeping at their desks. Carney took to Medium.com to write a vigorous rebuttal to the piece, and then he slugged away in a round 2 with Dean Basquet, editor of the Times, when the editor wrote his own rebuttal to Carney's original post. I thought Carney did an excellent job, and I was glad to see him weigh in. Since then, however, I don't think I've ever seen him quoted or covered in the press. If you Google Jay Carney Amazon, you will find the stories about his hiring in 2015 and the row of the Times, but nothing since then. That's what made this podcast so interesting to me. Most of it was spent at the beginning reliving tales from the previous administration, but finally Axelrod turned to Amazon in a way that might have put some strain on his relationship with his old friend.
Does he ever talk to you about the Post? Does he ask your advice on that, or your?
So it's just so listeners know, this is the Washington Post, not owned by Amazon.
Right.
There's some confusion.
One of the small things that isn't owned by Amazon.
That's not true. But
that little exchange gives you a clue as to where Axelrod is coming from in approaching Amazon. And also, I'd say the lack of preparation. He didn't even get the title right for Jeff Bezos, called him chair instead of founder and CEO. But he went on to press pretty hard on topics that frequently gets cited against Amazon on the lines that they're getting too big and they control too much.
It is enormously disruptive. And you've seen it's had an impact on the retail industry where old jobs have gone away, where local sort of the mom and pop store, the local independent bookstores and all that stuff have gone away in many communities. Make the case for why that's not a concern.
So Axe tees the anti-Amazon sentiment up in a fairly ordinary way. I wondered how Carney would respond.
We are still much smaller than some of the biggest retailers out there, like Walmart, much smaller. And you would, when we made the announcement around the acquisition of Whole Foods, by some of the press, you would have thought we were taking over grocery in America, but combined, we're less than 3% of grocery. All the big chains are much bigger, as is Walmart and others. So, but we are in a lot of different businesses, so it feels like we're very integrated into our customers' lives, and we're grateful for that.
Carney then took an interesting move, I thought, in response to a comment that Axelrod had made about the decline of independent bookstores.
One thing that has happened, like in the last several years, has been a resurgence of independent bookstores in America, like a double-digit increase year after year. I think that some of the disruption that you talk about in the retail markets has been due to malls and other kinds of big box stores as much as the evolution of e-commerce.
Having rebutted some of the impressions that Axelrod created in his earlier questions, Carney then moved to, I think, which is a pretty strong part of Amazon's story that we're going to be hearing a lot about in the future as these kinds of discussions continue.
We're one of the biggest job creators in the United States right now, and as well as obviously outside the United States. And we hire up and down the economic ladder across the country. And, I think we announced a little over a year ago, that we'd be hiring 100,000 people in America in the ensuing 18 months. And pretty much without exception, those jobs, even the lower wage jobs in our fulfillment centers, are higher paying with much better benefits than the alternatives that might be available to folks who are working in those jobs. And one of the things that I'm really gratifying for me is and this starts from the top with Jeff, is that our benefit structure is completely egalitarian. If you start working in a fulfillment center, starting level job tomorrow, you get the same health care that I get, and that means that our benefits, which have to compete with the tech companies, are really good, and there's not a comparison with other retailers.
I think what we see in this interview is that Jay Carney, the top public affairs guy at Amazon, is prepared to have these kinds of discussions, in this case with an old friend, but certainly kind of an influential political guy, and he probably spends a lot of time in Washington, D.C., and is part of Amazon's lobbying effort, although that's probably organized separately. It's a strong story to tell, and I was glad to see that the top guy at the company in public affairs is perfectly capable of getting it out there. For the tech tip, I want to refer you to blueprints.amazon.com. That's where you will learn to create personal Alexa skills in minutes. They're called blueprints. There are about 10 templates there. It's a very intriguing and easy to use process. I used one that basically enables you to have Alexa answer some questions. Alexa, What's your favorite podcast?
I'm very partial to the Kindle Chronicles, and so is Jeff.
Alexa, who is the best quilter in America?
That would be the Queen of Bright Colors, my friend Darlene Dieterman.
And so forth. There's one that they have set up that is a little, in the useful category is called House Guest, and you can have Alexa greet your guests, and then if they ask questions like, well, how do I turn the TV on, there'll be programmed answers that would give information. Same thing for a babysitter. There are also some games. There's trivia games, family jokes, and all sorts of things that would be fun and sometimes useful. Simple to type these into the fields where these skills are set up, and then within a few minutes or moments, they're in the system and you can interact with them using any of your Echo devices. Pretty cool. Hannah Howard received her BA from Columbia in Creative Writing and Anthropology in 2009, and this year she is finishing her MFA in Creative Nonfiction at Bennington College. In college and afterwards, she worked in top restaurants while struggling with an eating disorder and a series of flawed relationships with much older men. Out of this challenging material, she created her debut memoir, Feast, True Love In and Out of the Kitchen, published on April 1st by Little A, the literary imprint of Amazon Publishing. I reached Hannah by Skype in New York City on Wednesday, April 18th, and I began by asking her which topic is at the heart of her new book, food or love?
Oh, that's a great question. But I think for me, as readers can see right away, the love and the food are so intertwined that it's hard to separate them. But I think ultimately food is on the path to love. So I would have to privilege love at that number one position.
They go together so well. And then there's also the aspect of the eating disorder, so that your relationship with food runs into deep problems, which, there's a recovery aspect of it as well. Do you have a sense of what comes first, the love of food, or sort of the conditions for the eating disorder, or
I like to think that there was some sort of time in my childhood where the love for food was pure and unencumbered by the issues of control and obsession that later came up for me. But I think right away, when I was young, I started to use food not only in the way that I today believe is the positive way to use food, which is, of course, because we need to eat, but then also for joy and celebration and to bring people together. I think there was that, but there was also from a really early age a sense that food did it for me, and whether it was keeping me company when I was lonely, keeping me entertained when I was bored, food just seemed to be the answer to a lot of things bigger than itself.
Within food, cheese has a special place in the story. Why does cheese make us happy?
There's something magical about cheese, I really think. I mean, first of all, you just take milk and salt and cultures, and then you get everything from a giant wheel of Gouda that's been aged from 4 years to a milky, fresh, springy, snow white round of brie. So I feel like there's something really cool that kind of like alchemy, that you can make all of these things just from milk. And I just think cheese is ancient, cheese is delicious, it's living, it's breathing, and it does have a special way of making people happy.
Do you have a favorite cheese?
That's like asking my favorite child. No, I don't have any children. People ask me that all the time when I used to work behind the cheese counter at Fairway. And I do think I have a special place in my heart for really stinky, ooey gooey cheeses. There's a cheese that's only available in the winter time, made from the spring milk of on the French-Swiss border. That's one of my favorite cheeses in the whole world.
I've been told by my doctor that it would be a good idea for me to not eat cheese for heart disease, cholesterol, all of that. And I imagine you've got friends in the industry that get that hard news from their doctors who love cheese and have to all of a sudden do without it. Do you know anybody that's had to make that transition, and how do they do it?
Yeah, that is a bummer. I'm not a doctor, but I have been working with one of my cheese mentors, Max McKelman, is actually working on a book about the health benefits of cheese. And there have been a lot of studies that eating cheese is good for you. So I'm not, I would never say to someone who's been medically advised not to eat cheese to do the opposite, but I think it's a little bit more complicated than just cheese being unhealthy.
Yeah, that makes sense. The memoir, and anyone that's written a memoir has to deal with this issue of when is it brave and not stupid to reveal difficult personal material. And did you have a sense going into it as to where that line was going to be for you in writing such a personal story, or maybe in the writing of it and the editing? If you were advising someone setting out on their own memoir, how do you know when something that you're about to include in the story just really shouldn't be in the story because it's too intimate or it's too problematic in some other way?
Yeah, this was something that I thought about a lot while writing. And I do think I had a professor that I love who said, writing a memoir, it's not just like standing on stage naked. It's like standing on stage naked and turning around very slowly. And I think that there's a lot of truth to that. And I do think that often the vulnerable stuff is the good stuff. I think as I'm writing, if I'm cringing, it might mean that I'm onto something good. Another a piece of advice I heard was like, if you're terrified for your mom to read it, that's probably a good sign. So, I mean, I don't think vulnerability or intimacy on its own is stupid. I think it's stupid if it's for, like, thrills, or if it's not in the service of the story. But I think when it is, it's usually a good thing, which is not to say it was easy to do. I've been very terrified, but I think that being vulnerable has made for a more honest story.
Well, let's talk about the publishing path. How did you find your agent when you were starting out and wanting to publish a book?
I got really lucky because, I'm graduating from the Bennington MFA program in June, so I'm full of friends looking for agents, and I feel like my story was so relatively painless. I knew I wanted to write this memoir, and I was working for a website that doesn't exist anymore called New York Natives, and my coworker wrote a book about lucid dreaming that's been translated into all these languages, and I was kind of quizzing him because I wanted to write a book too. So I was saying, what did you do and how did you find your agent and blah, blah, blah. And he offered to introduce me to his agent. I sent her just a summary of what I had in mind and a few writing samples. And she said, can you send me more? And I said, what do you want to see? And she said, everything. So I sent her like everything I had ever written. And we had lunch and she loved the idea. And she had a lot of thoughts about it. And she signed me. And she helped me turn all of these diffuse ideas into a cohesive proposal. And she has been amazing ever since.
And then she approached publishers. How many times was it rejected before you found a place at Little A?
She approached publishers and, wow, we got the most lovely rejections. So many rejections, full of compliments. We love your writing. So that was kind of weirdly encouraging. So we heard from more than one publisher that they thought the eating disorder topic was interesting, and they thought the behind the scenes at restaurant topic was interesting, but they thought the two were for separate audiences, which I really disagree with, but that's what they came back to me with. And then one publisher wanted me to revise the proposal to make it sexier and more interesting restaurant, like juicy gossip. So I revised the proposal to follow those instructions. And then after they saw it, I can't remember, they said something like, oh, but now we want more about your experience as a woman from like a feminist angle. It was like, wait, I just revised the whole thing. It just felt like I couldn't win with them. So that was getting frustrating. After a lot of there must have been dozens of rejections. And it turns out that I knew through a friend, Morgan Parker, who was my first editor at Little A, and my agent sent the proposal to her, and she wanted it, and it was a miracle. And it really felt so serendipitous, and it was also very cool because although I didn't know Morgan well, I knew her a little bit, and it felt like such sensitive material, and that it would be really well cared for with her because she just was very invested and very kind about the whole thing. So we signed with Little A.
And when it was in her hands, was she doing some similar shaping of which part of the story she wanted to emphasize, or was she more just trying to follow what you wanted in the book?
I think she was really trying to honor what I wanted. She said that she really wanted to play a big part in the writing process if I wanted her to, because I only had about 50 pages when we sold the book, so I had to write the rest of the book. And then I would get frustrated because I'd sent her a whole bunch of pages and her comments were very abstract, and she would suggest a book that I should read, or she would say it needs to move along more, and I was like, oh, that sounds great, but I don't know how to do that. Yeah. That felt like a really big challenge. And it also was very helpful that I happened to be a student at an MFA program, because a few times I went to my professors with her edits and said, what do I do? And they said, very generously, they said, well, if it was me, this is how I would approach it. And that was incredibly helpful. And it was a long process. It's about 2 years between signing the contract, or maybe a little more than 2 years between signing the contract and the book being out in the world. So it's been through many rounds of edits. And about a year into that, Morgan left. She's also a poet and a writer, and she wanted to focus on her own work. And at first I was terrified because I felt like she had played such a big role in making Feast what it was. And then again, I got such great luck. Laura Vanderveer is my new editor, and she is wonderful and also was wonderful in different ways than Morgan and a lot more attuned to details. So at that point too, it was coming along, and she could really give me some more specific, actionable advice. And I was really grateful to have that advice at that time. So it just ended up working out brilliantly. So
you were working with the nonfiction faculty at Bennington. Which teachers did you have that were involved in this process?
So my first teacher, and it just worked out this way, was Ben Anastas. And Ben just happened to be my neighbor in Brooklyn Heights at the time. And he also published a memoir called Too Good to Be True with Little A. So he was like a great person for advice. And usually in the Bennington program, you submit a packet of about 20 pages every month to your professor. And he was willing to read 50 pages, 80 pages, and that was just, no one made him do that. So that was really helpful. And then I worked with Joan Wickersham next, who wrote the Suicide Index, who's a brilliant writer. I feel really lucky. And she was tough. I feel like she kind of ripped apart a lot of my submissions, usually for the best, but it was a little hard to stomach sometimes. And then I also worked with Dinah Laney and Clifford Thompson. So I've had a really good lineup of writers and mentors.
It's I went through that Bennington program 15 years ago, and I know that most of the packets that get sent in aren't from authors who are working on an actual book to be published. So it must have been pretty fun for those teachers to weigh in on a live project like that.
Yeah, I think it was a little different for them, and they definitely were wonderful. And I right, that's not usually how it works out for the students, but it's a great way for it to work out. You know, I got the edits from the publisher and from my professor, so it was like 2 for 1.
Yeah.
What did you study at Bennington? Nonfiction also?
No, poetry. Worked with Liam Rector and Ed O'Chester, April Bernard.
That is a great lineup. April Bernard is one of my favorites. I got to have dinner with her. She's brilliant. Yeah.
She is. She ripped me apart in one packet. I'll never forget it. It was a sort of an existential moment of doubt about the whole thing, which I'm now grateful for. But she was very clear, and she's a powerful poet. She is, and I think those existential moments of doubt seem to be part of the Bennington process. Yeah. I've had a handful. So Bennington was really part of the writing of this book. Did anything about your approach to writing change as a result of the program, that when you think about your next book or who you are as a writer now will be different because of what you learned so far at Bennington? Yeah, I mean, I learned so much more at Bennington than I bargained for. Some of it has just been this question of kind of balance. Like that first term when I was working with Ben, I write a lot of short stories for online publications, and he was saying, you're so used to writing these little pithy things. This is a memoir you're working on. You have more time. Slow down, linger, hang out, like really get into a scene and stay there for a while. So I was really working to do that. And then Joan, the next term, said to me, Hannah, the reader needs to be motivated to get from point A to point B. Like, get on with it. And I was like, wait, how do I do this? Both of those things simultaneously. So it's been sort of a question of finding out, like, what is that sweet spot? How can you do both of those things? But I think really the value has been making these incredible writer friends who are just the most wonderful people. Writing is so lonely, so having that community of writers is very cool. And also the cool thing about the Bennington program is just so much damn reading. Like there's 100 books. That's a lot of books. And all of those professors have recommended to me really different writers. And so I feel like my reading life is just so much richer. And that's always a huge benefit, I think, for any writer. Yeah, exactly. Lucy Greeley was there when I was there, and what the scholarship in her name was for an incoming student in nonfiction, or what's the nature of that scholarship? Yes, I think that's exactly what it is. I kind of feel like I'm part of her lineage because I didn't know who she was when I received that scholarship, and then of course I read Autobiography of a Face, and I just fell in love with that memoir. And then I also read Anne Patchett's memoir, Truth and Beauty, about her friendship with Lucy Greeley, and just became so intrigued by both of them. And then one of my favorite professors, Dinah, was a student of Lucy's. So I feel like even though she's no longer with us, she's kind of rubbing off on me, and she's definitely one of my writing heroes. That's cool. In your day job since 2012, you've worked at Fairway. That's a market founded in 1933. It now looks like it's kind of an industry leader. It aspires to be the world's greatest food store, I see on the website. And that would appear to put your current employer in competition with Amazon, which purchased Whole Foods last year and appears to be having some aspirations of its own in the food business, Amazon Fresh and all of that. Has the fact that you're being published by an imprint of Amazon Publishing created any awkwardness at Fairway? Well, I don't work at Fairway anymore. Oh. I left, but you're absolutely right. I think that they are such a cool place and really pioneered all of these amazing cheeses and olive oils, and they filed for bankruptcy about 3 years ago. They're still open, but they've really been struggling, and I had this incredible team of food people that I worked with there, and everyone is gone. Nobody is left. They've really been through a lot, and I actually, after Fairway, went to work for Dean and DeLuca, which is another iconic food market, and they also have been struggling and just closed a bunch of stores and went through a lot of rounds of layoffs, including me. So I think
it is a really tough time for retail grocery. Yeah, well, it's fascinating with Amazon taking over Whole Foods. I am a big fan, because I live in Manhattan, of FreshDirect, and get a lot of groceries that way, and they just show up at your door, and it's amazing, and you don't have to carry anything. On the other hand, like, my idea of a good time is getting to spend an afternoon, like, going to the fancy butcher or going to the cheese shop. I still really love that. So I feel like there's very much room for that, and there's room in the world for both the online delivery and the cool mom and pop food stores. Hopefully.
How about among your literary friends in the Bennington community, published by Amazon versus a traditional publisher? Any friction there?
Yeah, I mean, when we were choosing to work with Little A, my agent warned me too, like, people have a lot of feelings about Amazon, and they're not always positive feelings. And I understand that, but it's not that I sought out to be published by Amazon. It was that Amazon happened to be the people who believed in me and my book. And they've been so wonderful to work with. And I do feel also like Little A is a tiny imprint within a huge company. So I kind of get the best of both worlds, like that personal TLC and the brawn of the marketing and other kinds of reach of Amazon. But the Bennington people, they seem to just be excited for me. The only sort of flack I've gotten is from in organizing my book tour. A few stores have said, no, thank you, we won't host Amazon authors. Huh. And although many independent bookstores have said, we'd love to have you. So it seems to be a little...
I think that's changing. It seems like in the past it would have been 100% would have said no, but are you finding like at least half of the ones you approach are welcoming you?
Definitely. I just got back from LA and I went to Chevalier's and Last Bookstore, and there were two wonderful independent bookstores, and they were happy to have me. I'm going tonight to the Ivy Bookshop in Baltimore, which I'm really excited about. I'm from Baltimore, but my first choice in Baltimore was to read at Atomic Books, which is this really quirky bookstore where John Waters sometimes can be found. And when I was a teenager, I published a zine and they sold it for me. So I go way back with this place. And I stopped in and told them about my book, and they said, oh, we'd love to have you. And then when they made the Amazon connection, they sent me a long email and said, it's not personal, we're excited for you, but we just can't support Amazon publishing. And it did feel a little personal because I know this place really well. So on one hand, I think I do understand where they're coming from, but on the other hand, it kind of feels like they're missing the mark.
Well, especially since, a bookstore open to the market of ideas, and it just seems like it must be difficult for someone in that situation to make a decision like that, because here you are, an author, especially one they know from, right, has some history with, and then to let really kind of a business feeling of competition get in the way of making an author available in a store. It just seems like that must be kind of excruciating. I would hope it's excruciating.
I got that sense from their email, like they were really kind of struggling with this decision. Yeah. But most places have been very welcoming and seem excited. So that's great. Yeah.
Well, I noticed that the last acknowledgement in your book, it was an emphatic expression of love to a man not mentioned in the book, Anthony Malira. I understand that's your fiance. Given the series of rocky relationships with older men in the book, I found myself curious to know how old Anthony is and why you think this is going to have a different story to it.
He's a very appropriate age. He's 34. I'm 30. I was terrified to have him read the book. And one of the things he asked was, what do I have in common with all of these exes? And I had to think really hard about that question. And I did. And the answer is not much, very little, which is good. I mean, I think that I had to go through all of those tumultuous, ultimately unhealthy relationships to appreciate what a great one I have today. We're getting married in September. He's a lovely, smart, generous human. He's British. We met on a dating app. We've been together for a little over 3 years. And it's so different, and it still feels a little bit surreal because it's so unlike the relationships that came before, but in such a good way.
Yeah. The book is doing really well. I checked at Amazon, and today, 18 days after publication, it's number 48 in all Kindle ebooks and biographies and memoirs. It's a pretty broad category, and it's number 99 in biographies and memoirs published in any format, e or print. What's your understanding of why it's doing so well?
Well, I want to say, because it's wonderful. I think it has a lot to do with Amazon's prowess at getting the book in front of people and their marketing skills, because I'm not famous yet anyway. But I also think that these topics are really relevant to most people. So many, even if we don't struggle with an eating disorder, we struggle with something, and I thought, a lot of women will relate, but many men are telling me they also relate. I just think that forging a positive relationship with food and with ourselves is such a challenge, and it's such a universal struggle. So I think people just get it.
Yeah.
Hopefully. That seems to be the case so far. And this is such a dream. I've always wanted to write a book, and it has been really scary putting this intimate stuff about my life into the world, and just these responses of people saying like, "Oh, your story is like my story." It's unbelievable. Like, I just am so full of joy and gratitude.
Well, it's also really well written, so it's there's that.
Thank you.
I have been speaking with Hannah Howard, the author of Feast, True Love in and Out of the Kitchen, her debut memoir published this month by Little A. Thanks very much, Hannah.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
In content, Amazon Crossing, that's the translation imprint of Amazon Publishing, has a pretty big promotion going on, or celebration of World Book Day. They have 9 books that they're offering for free download on Kindle, and they're trying to connect 1 million readers with Kindle books in translation. These 9 books are from a lot of different countries, a lot of different genres, and I'll have the list of them in the show notes. This will go for another 4 days as I'm recording on Friday night. It ends at 11:59 p.m. Pacific time on April 24th. The list includes one book that I've read and talked about on the podcast, Last Train to Istanbul by Isa Kulin, and we had her answers to questions translated by one of the editors at Amazon Crossing a while ago. Another one that received a lot of notice is A River in Darkness, One Man's Escape from North Korea by Masaji Ishikawa. That's translated from the Japanese. Another one translated from the Greek is The House by the River by Lena Manta. That's an epic saga of love, adventure, and family from Greece's reigning #1 best-selling author. These books are popular elsewhere in the world. That's one of the ideas of Amazon Crossing, not just translating literary classics into English, but finding books that are being read around the world and then making them available to an audience in English. Amazon Crossing is really doing a great job in this, and this is a good way to celebrate the fact that they're bringing more translations into English than any of the other publishers in the U.S., including all of the big 5. You can see all the details of this at amazon.com/readtheworld. I had a comment from Werner Aguilar. This was on my description of book spinning, using a collection to move among different books. He writes, "What a great way to read. Like you, I wake up at all hours but listen to audiobooks instead of ebooks on my Android phone. I would like to figure out how to set up a procedure similar to spinning books. I also liked the book selection you have in your list. I have listened to audiobooks by Father Richard Rohr, Pope Francis, and Karen Armstrong. I primarily use Scribd for my downloaded books, and there is a reading history jump back into feature. It puts the last book accessed at the top of the list. Thanks for the great idea." That's it for this week. My guest next week will be listener Brett McNeil, who took a trip to the Amazon Go store in Seattle and was observing things very carefully so that we could have a conversation about his experience next week for TKC 508. This is Len Edgerly for the Kindle Chronicles from Denver, Colorado. I really appreciate your taking the time to listen to my show. Have a great day. Bye.